let me get us started. So hello, and welcome, and thank you all for being here. I am Mia Harnos. I am the Director of Energy Partnerships here at NCAP. And I'd like to start, if you would not mind, with a moment of silence. We're hearing a lot from our South and for all of the children and families that have been affected and experienced loss, and to acknowledge our community action leaders who are actively responding and dedicating funding and support to those affected. Our hearts and prayers are with you. Thank you for that. So next, I'd like to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded. There will be no like chat bots or any transcription in use today, but you are encouraged through the use of the chat feature to weigh in, ask questions. You can raise your hand. Today is designed to be highly interactive um, and to hear from you. And last, I want to say thank you to all of you in your offices, those of you who drive those long distances to bring weatherization services to those who need it most, for all the years you all spent in crawl spaces and attics. We see you. We know how hard you work. So thank you. Today, we definitely find ourselves in a place and time that's calling on us to manage our programs through change and uncertainty. We have to respond on multiple fronts. And in many cases, we know that when one source of funding is in flux, the rest of the organization will certainly be impacted. And this can be a very daunting and lonely position to be in as leaders, right? So today is about shifting or thinking about or moving toward shifting that mindset and that feeling of being stuck and unable to continue to serve, even in the most challenging of times, and to carry out your mission through scenario planning. So, scenario planning does help. It helps organizations prepare for a range of possible futures, from best case to worst case, by focusing on high impact, high probability risk. With ongoing policy shifts, funding uncertainty, and unpredictable weather, this is a structured approach that supports better decision making and builds resilience in times of uncertainty. So NCAP developed a broad agency organizational scenario planning toolkit. I would like to thank my colleague, Mary Beth, and the members of the team that are here, because we've taken it and we've shifted, and we're going to bring it to the weatherization level. So we've taken that broader template and made it more focused on all of you. This will provide you guys with some guidance to assess financial, operational, and community impacts, um, and that will help your team develop decision filters to guide your responses. So today we'll provide a brief overview of scenario planning. We're going to highlight some key resources, approaches from the toolkit, and we'll use you guys as peer experts to explore how weatherization program managers and directors can apply scenario planning in their departments and in their organization. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my lovely colleague, Mayor Beth Schneiber Remrev, Director of Organizational Capacity Building at NCAP. And she's going to lead us through the promise of community action and then into our presentation today. Thank you. Mayor Beth?
Thanks, Mia, and good afternoon, good morning still to some of you. Really excited to be with all of you today. We want to start, as we always start, by grounding ourselves in the promise of community action. I invite you, wherever you are, to read it along with me, although on mute would be most helpful so we don't have the canon of community action going throughout the Zoom. So, community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And this promise is essential to us when we are dealing with uncertainty. And uncertainty is really the topic of today's session in a lot of ways, and how we can use scenario planning to address the uncertainties. And one of the best ways when things are unsure, when you are uncertain about the future, lean into vision and purpose. And man, when I'm having a tough day, I know I go back to the promise to remind myself why we do these crazy things we do, in service, right? It's always in service to our neighbors and our colleagues. So okay, on the next slide, Mia introduced us already. So hello, here we are. I am the Director of Organizational Capacity Building if we've never met. So I get to focus on all of those really fun back of house operations that get my heart pounding. I don't know about all of yours. Things like board governance, community assessment, strategic planning, all of those really core back of house operations that make sure that your organizations have the capacity they need to be able to deliver their mission. And so I'm really excited to be with you today to talk a little bit about specifically scenario planning. So on the next slide, we have our agenda of what we're going to do together. I'm going to give you a quick overview of scenario planning. We're going to talk about some of those scenarios that impact you, some resources, and we will have some peer discussion time for you as well. You will go into breakout rooms. You'll have some time to talk with one another. But friends, you don't have to wait until breakout room time to talk. This is a highly interactive session. Please put comments in the chat, raise your hand, come off mute. We want to have a conversation in our time together today. I think on our next slide, speaking of interactive, one of the ways that we plan to interact together is through Menti. And if you've never used Menti, it's very, very simple. You can, at this moment, either go ahead and scan that QR code that's on the screen, or you can go to menti.com and put in that code that you see up top there, or right there, 62728425. And then when you get there, you will be in the Menti with us. We're going to use the Menti throughout the session today. So after we ask this first question, please don't navigate away from that page or tab. Leave it open because we're going to keep coming back to it, okay? So I'm giving folks just a minute to get set up. When you get there, there is a little thumbs up in the corner. You can hit that for me so I know that you're there. Yeah, oh, there come the thumbs ups. I love it. I love it. Okay. So our very first Menti question is, we want to know who's here with us. So go ahead and identify what your role is in the weatherization program. So do we have executive directors? Yes, we do. We have program directors. And you can see as you start putting in your responses, our little chart starts populating. Our friends who are in other, I did see a state office was with us. If there are other roles, you can let us know who you are. We're happy you're here, regardless of your role. Finance leads. Yes, I'm excited to see we have one lone finance lead who's willing to admit it here. So we'll be very kind to you while we're together. Okay, and I see administrative assistant. Wonderful. Okay, so that's very helpful to know who is in the room with us. So on the next slide, then, we'll come back to the Menti in a little bit. I want you to think about the following options, and I want you to think about which one of these makes you feel a little more stressed than the other, okay? So option A is, we might have delays getting reimbursed, and we're not really sure how long or how it's going to affect us, okay? Does that make you feel more stressed, or does option B, if our reimbursements are delayed by more than 60 days, we're going to shift to a monthly progress billing and prioritize our projects that require less upfront cash flow? Option A, Jennifer says, option A makes me more stressed. Got to pay people. Yeah. Others, option A, option B, which one's making you feel a little more stressed? Or our crew is short-staffed and we're struggling to keep up, versus if staffing remains below 80%, capacity for a month, we're going to cross-train administrative staff to assist with scheduling and adjust job mix towards smaller, quicker retrofits. So I see Sahil said option B, which is interesting. So, a lot of times when we put up these scenarios, folks recognize that option A, it looks a lot simpler, right? But there's a lot of uncertainty in those short words. A lot of folks do feel more stressed when they see option A because they go, gosh, there's a lot of uncertainty there, and I don't know what it is that we would do. Option B, to Sahil's point, sometimes when you see it, you go, that looks like a lot of detail. But a lot of times when you start to dig in there, you recognize that option B is really the more detailed plan for what you do if you face a major uncertainty, right? And option B really kind of helps organizations be able to be responsive and operate in uncertain environments. So this is where scenario planning comes in. Scenario planning on the next slide is a structured process to help you take those big kind of fuzzy, what if this happens, and really plot out, okay, if that were to happen, here are the potential impacts that it would mean for my organization. And then here's how we're going to respond to it. It helps you to be prepared and be responsive to those outside forces that, friends, none of us control, right? Um, it helps us to be proactive and prepared when those uncertainties happen. Scenario planning is not about predicting the future, right? Like the one future that could happen, but about thinking about what are those potential things that could happen? What does it mean if they happen? And then creating your plan for how you'll respond. Scenario planning can be deployed at an organization level, and my ED friends on the call here, your organization should be doing scenario planning broadly, but you can also use scenario planning at a program level too. And in some cases, by going into that program level type of scenario planning, you can really help your organization more broadly be prepared because you'll have thought about those specific implications about what happens if some of our funding goes away, right? What happens if we lose a key partner? What happens if somebody goes out on leave? You'll have those specific details to be able to tell your organization so that they can better prepare more broadly. So on the next slide, when you're scenario planning, it's not just like listing out, the list of things that we're worried about and then creating a plan for how we'll respond. It's really about identifying those things that could happen that we can't control, and then looking at modeling what does that mean specifically to our organization so you can see what the impacts would actually be before the bad thing happens. Um, and then that allows you, with that information, you are armed with good information to create strategies that are based in reality that you can deploy if that thing happens. A lot of times when we talk about scenario planning, we focus on the financial aspect because almost every scenario has a financial component to it. Um, but there are other lenses through which we really recommend that you think about your possible scenarios. It's not just the finance side, but those things that happen might have an impact on your programmatic side of your operations, right? Your ability to hit your production targets, your ability to maintain your eligibility, your partnerships. A lot of times those things also impact your operations, right? Do you have the staffing you need? Can you sustain the staffing you need to be able to deploy that program? Do you have the facilities, the technology? And then a lens that I think is often overlooked in scenario planning is the community lens. And I'll say I think it's because a lot of scenario planning materials are really focused on kind of for-profit corporations, who do business and don't necessarily have to think about the mission side of their work. But friends, we live in the mission space, right? We do this work not because we're trying to get rich, because we care about the community. And so all of these things that could happen ultimately impact the people who live in our communities and our ability to serve them and support them with high quality services. So um, on the next slide, you might be going, well, is this really relevant to weatherization? And Friends, yes, 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 it is, because there are all kinds of scenarios that you all and possibilities and things that could happen that you all face every day, right? The policy shifts, funding gets delayed, weather, I mean, hello, weather happens, right? And you all know the very real operational and staffing challenges that the program faces. The headline here is scenario planning is going to help prepare you to maintain service quality and impact no matter what all of those things are that happen in the bigger world around us. Mia, what do you want to add there?
Well, it's definitely true what you're saying. In we hear, especially from our rural communities, that in events such as the one we're seeing, and big storms like Helene, we just did a webinar a couple weeks back, that CAPs are seen and serve as key partners in the response and recovery after a weather emergency. And as we're seeing in the news today, these kind of events are just unexpected, um, devastating. Breakdowns in communication happens, infrastructures break down. And so that leaves us as leaders having to shift from our tried and true and trusted strategies, as you said, with production, to pivot and to change course. So I want to kind of dig down into like like a weatherization scenario. I mean, think about this. If you what if your main office or your service hub is one of the ones that are underwater and will not be back online for 90 days? What if it isn't back online for 6 months? You were totally on track to hit those initial 30% production goals, right? Those goals that would unlock your next tranche of funding, but your lead contractor's truck and tools were damaged in the storm. And that contractor is going to have issues for quite a long time with his or her insurance company. You can't do any work with that contractor 6, 9 months from now. So what are you going to do? What if that funding is going to be delayed in coming to you for 90 days and you don't have cash on hand to pay staff or contractors for work that has been done to date, right? So they're kind of in limbo. And what we're coming to say is that all of these are bad, all of these are bad situations to find yourself in. These are not positive, happy times, but you just have to do something. You can't be stuck. And so I think, if I had to kind of put out a clear message, is that there is always more than one option, but it takes the organization and the team to work through those options together. That's what I would add. Thanks, Mary Beth.
Thank you, thank you. And Mia, I think you hit on something there that, when we're looking at uncertainty, one of the things that helps all of us feel better is to know that there's a plan, right? We know what we're going to do. Maybe we don't know for sure every single step, but we have a strategy for how we will respond. And then we're not caught flat footed when the bad thing happens, right? That helps helps people to be able to continue to operate when things are really uncertain.
Do we have any April 1 subgrantees here today with us? Um, so April 1, right? We know that um, those specific organizations who run on an April 1 program year, um, they're really needing this scenario planning right now. There's shifts in policies, delays. We know all of the things that are happening. So
Mhm.
making those decisions on based on what you're experiencing today, there is no uniform guidance that can apply across all of us. Scenario planning enables quality services to continue. And so, for those April ones and July ones, this is very timely right now. And you can still do some good work in the community, even as things are changing.
Thanks, Mia. Thanks, Mia. So, colleagues on the call, we're not trying to be a downer here. We're we're trying to help you understand why scenario planning is so important and relevant to you. It's not just something your senior leadership should be doing, but really we all have a responsibility to our organizations to help it be strong. And scenario planning is one of the ways that you can help your organization be respond and help it respond and fulfill its mission. On the next slide, back in the winter, we put out a scenario planning toolkit. And if you haven't checked it out before, I hope that you'll check it out. Um, it gives you an overview of kind of what scenario planning is, and then gives you some tools to help you build out your specific scenarios for your organization. This was highlighted by Energy Out West, so maybe you saw it there. I hope so. And if not, I hope that you'll take a peek at it. There's a lot of tools and resources in there to make scenario planning a lot easier for you. So hopefully our legwork helps you and saves you some work. So now I want to kind of go into the steps of what you do to engage in scenario planning. So what should we do? So we know that there are things that could happen. How do we go from that big nebulous scary thing to a specific strategy, right? And that's on the next slide. Kind of three key high level steps. You got to identify your drivers. What are those things that could happen? And then create and understand and model what does it mean specifically if those things happen, and then you generate a response. It's really important that, in scenario planning, the development of your scenarios is really critical, because you guys know this very well. Sometimes as a problem presents, if you just try to jump to generating the response, you might miss a nuance. You might miss a detail, right, that you need to be planning for. And sometimes we also suffer worse in our minds than we do in reality. Sometimes we underestimate the impacts of a particular driver. So by developing scenarios, it forces you to go down into, if that really happens, what will it practically mean? So don't skip over that step number two. It's really, really important. Okay, on the next slide then, let's start going into how do you do this? How do you identify your drivers? Um, this is something that you can do with your team. You could look and just start to generate a list of, hey, what are the things that could happen that might disrupt our program, right? Um, and you guys know some of the things that could happen, right? We could have a funding flow issue. We could have some issues with our supply chain, weather. I mean, all of those things that you know about your organization, right? And you will probably generate a really long list of, here's all the things that are keeping us up at 2 o'clock in the morning when we think about the program, right? Um, at that point, when you've got your really good list of, here are things that could happen, what I don't want you to do is take that list and go develop scenarios for all of them, because you do not have time to do that. You can prioritize those risks, those things that could happen, in terms of how severe the impact is and how likely it is that they're going to happen. That way, you take that really long list and get down to a list of maybe 3 or 4 things that you want to dive deeply into, because if they happen, they're going to have a high impact on your organization and they're very likely to happen. So, some scenarios, though, are going to maybe have a severe impact. A meteor could hit the Earth. It's not likely. So it's probably not something that you should spend your time building out a scenario plan for, right? It's not a good use of your time. In the same vein, I'll say, sometimes there's things that are likely to happen. Maybe you'll lose a supplier, but maybe that impact isn't so severe. You don't want to spend time on those things either. There's inherent risk in doing this work. And so, some things you might just have to go, yeah, that's something that could happen. We all agree it could happen, but we know the impacts aren't so severe. So, like, we're going to just accept that risk. And getting into alignment, I'll say, as a team, on what are those things that we're really worried about and what are those things that we know could happen, and we're just going to take them as they come, also has value to your organization. So cute little 3x3 risk matrix here from Smartsheet. You can check out that resource. Really good tool for your organization. So remember when we said that this was an interactive session? We would love to know on the next slide, get your input on what are those what ifs? What are some of those key drivers, those things that you're thinking about in your weatherization program right now? What kinds of what ifs are you experiencing or planning for or think you should be planning for right now? What are those 2 a.m. thoughts about your program? Yeah, loss of funding. Loss of funding is top of list for a lot of organizations. And funding, federal budget cuts, yeah. And it might not even just be loss of funding, it might also just be like delays in funding, right? Delays in funding in some cases can be even more impactful than a total loss of funding, right? Um, we're short-staffed. What if we lose contractors? LIHEAP funding, loss of key staff, program crashes, unending unknowns. Yeah, that is very real. Staffing shortage. So, getting contractors paid. Wow. Yeah. We could have this support group at 2 in the morning, probably. You think, Mia? Yeah. About all the things that we're worried about.
It would help
Um,
me.
Yes, yes, yes. We'll up in this room and Mia and I will be here at 2 in the morning and you all can join us. But um I love this new program funding. By the way, sometimes those things that happen may be a really good thing, but also could have major impacts on your program, right? It could still negatively impact your program, even if you get new funding, because maybe you don't have the capacity that you need to be able to be responsive. So all of these things that you are worried about, you can kind of list these out, identify these drivers. Some of these things we know could happen, right? And so when you know your what ifs, then we can begin to develop our scenarios, which is on the next slide. So we talked about funding. Okay, we're worried about a loss of funding. But there are a myriad of scenarios that could happen with that idea of a loss of funding. And there's a big difference between, our utility money is going to be cut by 20% versus our utility funding is going to be cut by 70%, right? Or 100%. So when you've identified your buckets, then you can begin to say, what are the likely scenarios that we should look at, right? Is it, look at the funding cut by 50% and 100%, because your response is going to be incredibly different. Or what if we're short staffed for the next 6 months versus what if we're short staffed for the next 3 months, right? Whatever those markers are for your scenarios, you want to identify those so that then you can begin to explore, what does that impact actually mean, right? So if our funding is cut by 50%, you could then model out, okay, if our funding is cut, does that mean that we can make payroll? Does that mean that we can hit our production targets? Does it mean that, we can pay our vendors, right? And see, where do you have crunches? And this is where looking through those four lenses is really essential. Look through that finance lens, look through that programmatic lens, right? Are you able to hit your production targets? Look through that operations lens. Do we, have the staff we need? Do we have the supplies we need? All of that kind of good stuff. And then also, I'm going to again say that community lens is really, really, really essential. So some tools to help you when you're thinking about, well, what would that look like specifically? On the next slide, this is a tool from Propel Nonprofits that helps you with scenario budget planning specifically. It's a really nice, robust tool that you can put in, your specific budget numbers and then, model out what happens if we're cut 50% versus 30%. So you can see those specific impacts. Now, your finance staff, I know we have one finance staffer on the line. They may have their own budget planning tool that they use. That's totally cool. But if you don't, this is a really nice one to take a peek at and start from. And Propel puts out really good high quality products. So you can put this into your toolbox. Mia, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, no, I don't. Sorry, I went off mute.
Okay. No,
Sorry.
no, you're all good. You're all good. I thought you were really jazzed about the budget planner. So, okay. Mia said, no, I'm not. I'm not. Okay. So on the next slide then, This is one that I think might jazz my colleagues in the room based on the discussion about staffing. This is a tool from McLean and Company about identifying those critical roles, those mission critical roles for your programs. So the reality is that sometimes when funding is reduced, it might mean that we have to examine our staffing, right? And so this critical role identifier can help you with looking at across your team who are the essential people that you need to keep the lights on and keep the program running. Um, this tool can also help you by identifying, do I have any gaps between the staff that I have and the critical skills that I need to fill? So you can check out this tool here as well. Another really good tool to help you out is to use a strategy map to help you manage the dual bottom line that so many of our organizations operate in. And that's on the next slide. A strategy map basically looks at, you know, how sustainable is our financially sustainable are our strategies compared with how well do they align with our impact or our mission, right? We have those programs that maybe are really financially sustainable and they're really high impact. And if you have those strategies, you hold on to them and you don't let anybody ever take them from you. But we also know that we have some strategies that don't really generate us much revenue or don't generate good financial profitability, but they are just mission critical. And what you hope is that you have enough of those things that generate you some positive revenue to offset those mission leaders. But we do also sometimes have those programs that are kind of potential distractions, right? They're not making us any revenue. They're not really they're not financially sustainable. And they don't align with our goals. So by charting out some of your different strategies and programs on on a map like this, that can help you to get clear and visualize really where do our strategies fall. This is a really cool tool from the Bridgespan group. And it's again totally customizable. You put in all your details and it will help you build out your specific strategy map. So I hope that you'll take a peek at that.
This was something that I also found because scenarios come when you receive or you're going to go after new funding. And
Mhm.
so this helps to also, I think, prevent what we would call like mission creep, where it's a good idea, it's got a big dollar sign behind it, it feels really like cool, but it really doesn't necessarily fully align with the mission or the moment. And so this can
Mhm.
also be a tool to help you to make decisions of whether or not to take on a new venture.
Yeah, yeah. I always say saying yes to something means you're saying no to something else. So, you want to be really clear before you say yes to something if it's going to do what you need it to do. So, we have another Menti question for you on the next slide. So, we've talked about these four domains, what you should be thinking about your possible scenarios through, right? We want to know, how prepared you feel to really explore the implications of these various scenarios. So you should have a little slider and you should be able to slide your little slider accordingly for each one of these areas. Oh, there. Okay, I was getting real nervous. Whenever you do technology, you always hope it will work, and I'm really glad to see that it's working. So right out of the gate, we're seeing folks feel pretty okay, or they feel the strongest, the most prepared for handling the operations side, the programmatic, community, yeah, and that financial one is sliding on down there. And I really, I expected to hear that, right? A lot of us are not financial gurus. If we were, we would, go work in the finance office probably. But one of the points I want to make here is that when it comes to, your finance, even some of your operations and scenario planning, you really can't do this all by yourself. You're going to have to call on your finance staff, your HR staff, your leadership staff to have really specific conversations, and in some cases support you with, okay, if our revenue is cut by 50%, what does that really mean, right? What does that impact for our program? If we need to really staff up quickly, what does that mean for our program? That is like a good question for your HR staff. So you will probably have to work cross-functionally. And I always say that working cross-functionally, that always pays dividends in the long run, right? Getting to know your finance staff better, getting to know your HR staff better, they will serve you more than just in your scenario planning.
Maribeth, I
Yeah.
totally agree. When I'm kind of reflecting on some work we did prior to coming to NCAP, I helped to lead Wayne Metro, which is the community action agency responsible for that serves the city of Detroit and surrounding communities. So hopefully I'll see you all in my hometown in August. But one of the lenses that we looked through was when we knew that there was going to be a funding cut, and we kind of looked cross-functionally, and we really did some comparisons about like which teams or which staff were holding, um, kind of like what the burden was, how many clients were they seeing each day versus maybe this
Mm.
other part of the organization, how many transactions were happening with this specific person versus the other. And so by trying to kind of evaluate what workload was, we were really able to get really sharp in terms of setting
Mhm.
milestones and goals and, helping to find efficiencies where we could. And so we didn't have to, quote, lay off as many staff as we had thought. It wasn't like doomsday. What it was really taking a look at the workloads, and the production levels of staff, and we really came out better than we thought we would.
That's a really good point, Mia, that, as you begin exploring the impacts, you might naturally find some opportunities that you wouldn't see if we're just kind of in react mode, right? By taking the time to deeply understand what does this actually mean? Who are we serving? What skill sets do we have on the team? You might find a solution in looking deeply at the problem. So that's a really beautiful point. Thank you for sharing that with us, and with the team. And colleagues on the line, if you have similar experiences, we would love to hear them too. So you are always welcome at any point to come off mute, raise your hand, put it in the chat. We want to hear from you too. So thanks for doing the Menti here. Once on the next slide, once we know those scenarios, right? Once we've enumerated what are the things that could happen, what are the impacts, then you can work on your strategies to deploy if those scenarios come to fruition. So for each scenario, you ask, so what will we do, right? What are we going to do? And Mia, you just talked to a number of these, right? Maybe you just need to change the way that you do your operations. Maybe you have to change your building. Maybe you have to let go of some assets or, share assets differently. Or maybe you have to change the way that the resources you still have are allocated. Um, Another really big one is communication. And I want to stress communication early and often. We very rarely over communicate. That is almost never a problem that you hear is like, we got too much communication from leadership about what was going to happen. So that communication is really essential. And if we're looking at something like the potential need to, uh, uh, you know, um, prolong our payment periods or delay payment to our vendors or contractors, early communication is going to go a long way in maintaining solid relationships, right? So make sure that you're thinking about how you're going to communicate proactively to everyone who's impacted, so that they're not left in the dark. And then similarly, partner coordination here. Maybe you can't do it. Maybe you have to let go a part of your program, but maybe a partner in the community can help you to fill a gap that you see. And so that brings us to another point here. And Mia, you just spoke to this so beautifully that, when you get into this strategy and scenario planning, it can be really easy to get stuck in this kind of a scarcity mindset where you just think like, I have to reduce, I have to shrink, I have to let go of staff. And there is kind of a trap you can get stuck in, which is like a cut only trap. And that is a trap that it's very easy to fall into. And that's on the next slide. Mia, do you want to say anything about avoiding that only trap?
Yeah, I think because it's like the most obvious response, I mean, that's what most organizations spend the lion's share of their budget on. And, I think the most obvious and like quick and, like let's just, make the decision um, to cut. And in the short term, that can be a quick fix. But when thinking about the long term, cutting staff can actually lead to some unintended long term impacts to your program, your agency, and to your community. Um, the first and foremost, I think, is going to be talent loss. And, hiring a workforce is a challenge for us all. When you find a good employee that does really good work, is highly dedicated and committed to the mission, retaining that employee is in the best interest of you, your team, the organization, and the community. You got to think about the time and effort and resources it will take um, to recruit, onboard, to train, and to build back what that staff member contributed. So I would say another unintended consequence that often happens when we cut staff is that when programs lose those high performing staff, the program loses momentum. The
Yeah.
culture suffers, leadership suffers, and programs that cannot perform at a high level leads to WAP funding going unspent. When we think about what happens when WAP funding goes unspent in one community, it is then likely that it will be reallocated to other contiguous communities. So, but this means that in those cases, that the federal funding that has been allocated to those most in need in that specific community are left behind. They're left without access to services that are allocated for them and that they are entitled to receive. But because of a decision, maybe to cut staff, was made without exploring some of these alternatives for
Mhm.
retaining those most valuable assets.
Mhm.
Um, in fact, the community over the long term, then, again, it's like that cycle that continues, that poverty cycle continues. So, there are examples that, I've seen in and around take place where, agencies have decided potentially or have explored ways to share directors, to share talent in these times of, feast or famine. This happens to, be more of that famine time. But then, hopefully there will be yet another, round of um, of resources that will come behind those. And so you would not have let your most valuable, your MVP, um, go in that moment. So that's what I have to add. Thanks, Maribeth.
Yeah, thank you, Mia. And it makes me think of, just one of my favorite adages is never cut what you can untie. And when you get into this space where you're trying to weigh what are some potential responses that we could take, one of the things you might consider is how permanent is this decision that we're making, right? Are we cutting something when really there's another option that we could can we shift capacity? Is there another option that is less permanent that might allow us to be responsive? Especially in times of uncertainty, those really permanent decisions become even riskier in some ways. So, in the scenario planning toolkit, we do have this chart in there about some of the ways that you can avoid this cut only trap. You can look at, like, are there some overhead costs we can reduce? Can we change, again, the building that we're renting? Can we change our leases? Can we renegotiate some of the terms of our contracts, right? There are things that you can do to proactively be responsive and keep your organization nimble in these times. I do want to give a caveat here too. There's that revenue growth in the middle. And one of the things you see in there is about fundraising and new grants. And in no way do we want to suggest that, the best way to deal with a major budget shortfall is just to like go out and raise more money. Because the reality is, like, if you lose a major grant, you're probably not going to be able to just fundraise your way out of that, right? We do not mean to imply that in any kind of way. And we were having a conversation this morning, Mia, about like, capital campaigns. They take time, they're for a specific purpose, they take a lot of energy. So, yes, fundraising can help, but it's not a quick fix to, major budget challenges. So, yeah, you can check out this sheet that's here. Um, yes, and Jennifer put in the chat, another thing that is essential for weatherization programs is a good succession plan for program manager and energy auditors. Jennifer, that brings me back to that risk matrix that we were talking about like those severity and likelihood of things to happen. And like, it's known that everyone who works for your organization at some point will leave. It's like a known fact. All of us, we love our organizations. One day, all of us will leave our organization. So why wouldn't we plan for when that time comes, right? What will we do when this position turns over? Because all positions will eventually turn over. Um, so yeah, having a really good succession plan in place is going to protect your organization against all kinds of unknowns that come from that.
One thing that I'd like to kind of just flag here for this group is that what we're finding is that there is like 1 to 2% of weatherization professionals that say that that they had like a plan to become a weatherization professional. It was much more serendipitous. It was, someone kind of said to them, "Hey, I think you're really good at this," or "Hey, you've got some of these skills. Why don't you come?" So it was like kind of that emotional kind of contact, and someone saying, "Hey, I think you could do this." And so it becomes even more important to Jennifer, to your point, is that, succession planning isn't always right within the weatherization department. It could be your administrative assistant that is showing, um, that is showing promise. It could be someone who's doing some work on a building that you're working in. So weatherization succession doesn't necessarily, again, have to come directly from the linear, line. And, I find it really cool that a lot of weatherization leaders that we meet or that I meet, there's always those that come from the field and who know all of that, who all know all of all the guidance and all the things that you have to know to be a good weatherizer. But
Mhm.
there are also those back office professionals who are like, you know what, I want to run this program. I want to find the efficiencies. I want to drive production. I want to figure this thing out, that often rise to that leadership level. That's right. Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Girl power, girl power.
I love seeing the, kind of creative thinking, Jennifer, that you put in here, right? We have this big shortage of energy auditors, and so you're doing some work study, you're growing some new energy auditors. I want to see a whole webinar on that. I'll just put that in Mia's bucket and back away slowly. Perfect. Love it. Would love to hear more about that. And that's, by the way, one of those things to get out of the cut only trap is how could we grow ourselves out of this problem, not just how do we cut ourselves out of this problem, right? So,
Mary Beth,
Jennifer, yeah,
if I could come off for just a second,
yeah,
so I
please.
have to type all this, but tell you that one of the things that as an ED or as an executive director or CEO that I've realized as it relates to weatherization is we are the product. Okay. When my staff say, oh my God, we're going to lose our weatherization funding, maybe certain funding under DOE or Health and Human Services, we may lose those fundings, but there's other funding in the world, in the nation, that's doing weatherization work that may not always call it that word, but it also requires energy auditors. And what I'm finding out and what I'm realizing is I don't ever want those other funding streams to go away, but if they go away, that isn't weatherization. The people with the skills, the credentials, the tenure in the program, That is weatherization that we have to sell as a service if we have to. So I've partnered up with some new partners, new to me, and they're doing weatherization work under the EPA. They're getting funded through the EPA, but it's weatherization work. We've already started meeting. They've come to me and said, we need energy auditors now for our work. It's exactly the same work. So I encourage leadership to really consider that option, because if those funding streams go away, we are the product. Well, it's not the funder, it's the people that hold the credentials, that hold the training, that have the door blowers, that have insulation machines. That's us, the network. And so we can then do fee for service or capture other grants that might not be under the traditional funders of DOE and HHS. Even though we respect and want those funders to stay, we got to branch out. And so in my experience down here in the Southeast, work is coming from other funding sources that have nothing to do with the network or nothing to do with DOE, coming out of the EPA, but it's weatherization work. Now they're seeking us. So I'm answering RFPs as if we're going to do the work potentially. Now, if that were to happen, I'd have to figure out how to not bill my grantor for who I'm using, but that's just a logistic,
You
I'd
can solve
rather
that problem.
I'd
Yeah.
rather sell the network as, yeah, we're the service, we're the weatherization, because that's what they can't duplicate in a community. I don't care who you are. You can't just come in and say, I'm going to be an energy auditor this week. It's deeper than that. And so in Georgia, we're trying to just help our own colleagues and ourselves by, we're actually growing 4 energy auditors. 2 of them are female. One of them just graduated. So that was one of the ways that we tried to avoid the cut only trap that I wanted to lead us into originally.
I love it. I
So
love
thank
it.
you for letting me share.
No, thank you, Jennifer, for sharing. And I think your colleagues probably really appreciated hearing more about your approach. And as you were speaking, it just reminded me kind of Mia, where you started, which is like when we get stuck in the cut only trap, like if we cut too much, then we're robbing our community of the asset that it has, right? So Jennifer, you just talked about, you're growing these energy auditors, you're growing this capacity to not only do the work through the current funding, but to be able to do that work ongoing through other potential avenues, right? To grow that work. So I think that was a really beautiful example. And thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing that. Always good to hear from you. Okay, so just taking a peek at time here, I'm going to move us ahead to the next slide. Just one of the other things that you can do in that avoiding the cut only trap is to look at shared services. And Mia, you did just kind of start to speak to this. This is a great resource from our friends at CAP Law about how you can explore shared services and mergers. It also talks about mergers, but it's a really nice resource, so maybe it's, to cut those overhead expenses, maybe you're sharing core finance staff across 2 different organizations, or maybe you're sharing a crew across organizations so that they can be responsive when the other agency needs it and they can be responsive when you need them, right? And then you're maintaining that core capacity to be able to respond if and when the funding returns or ramps back up. So this is a really nice resource to check out as well.
Yeah, I would say, for those who have not spent some time going through the CAP resources, they really are a gem and a gold mine. Mine. They are, there are legal eagles, and they are really here, like we are their purpose. And when thinking about building out what it is that you think that you need, or if you're going to do a new venture, or if you're trying to figure out how to do this, it is likely that they have set up some kind of framework for you to begin from. And then as you might need some additional more focused and targeted supports. But I have just found that instead of maybe hitting up a for-profit consulting firm that is maybe local to you, thinking about how CapLaw's experiences from across the network, they've likely seen it before, and they're mission driven. And so sometimes, you're kind of like, oh, what do I do? I think when thinking about it, I I would, knowing what I know now, I wish I would have deferred to cap law many times in the past.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I had cap law on speed dial at one point when I worked at a local agency because they knew all the things, right? And they really helped me understand things. I still call cap law today, right? Even here. So they're a great resource. Yes, yes, yes. Um, One more point before I show you an example scenario and an example plan on the next slide. I feel like parents everywhere want to show this next slide to their children, and that's that as time goes on, by the way, that your options actually kind of narrow, and that it's really important that you are proactively planning and thinking about those points at which you are going to implement some of the strategies that you're deploying, right? So we just talked about um, you know, raising funding, for example. Well, raising funding, when you're right up against, the bills being due or whatever, like your options are pretty narrow there and you're at pretty high risk. Or what Jennifer just mentioned about their growing capacity now for the future, right? Well, you couldn't deploy a strategy like that to be effective to meet the need of needing more energy auditors 2 months before you need them, probably, right? So you've got to be sure that you're giving yourself enough of a time horizon and being conscious of just how those options might narrow with time in your planning. Yeah, Mia.
Well, and I would just add, like, this is just kind of giving everyone some grace that this is not like the natural way, I would say, that weatherization is designed for weatherization leaders to behave and to think, and the mindset that you have to kind of go into the work. It's, did you hit the units? Did you hit the units? Are you going to hit the units? And
Yeah.
so that's a huge value proposition. That is why, that is what we are judged on. And so this type of work often falls to the wayside
Mhm.
because you're running straight and you're coming in every day and you know what you have to do and it's right there on your desk. But really, this has to be factored in to your work time,
Yeah.
um, because yeah, hitting the units matters,
Mhm.
um, but so does strategic decision making and, leaders at the table discussing these things. Um, it's
Mhm.
super duper important. Mary Beth, is there like a golden rule that, X% of your week should be
Mhm.
dedicated to some strategic decision making, some
Huh.
strategic thinking, to kind of like that mind time?
That's a good question, and I don't know if I have a single answer to that. Um, and I'm sure that somebody has a golden rule for it. I don't know that I have a golden rule for it, but here's maybe what I want to say about that. And in the when we get to our tips for scenario planning, one of our tips is don't get overwhelmed. And by breaking scenario planning up into smaller chunks, it makes it a lot more approachable and easy to accomplish. So instead of saying, okay, we're going to need 3 days and we're going to hunker down and we're just going to talk to each other about scenario plans for 3 days, like that sounds like torture to me. I don't know about you, but it sounds like torture to me. But, could you spend 25 minutes in one of your all staff meetings or one of your team meetings to talk about what are those potential risks that we're facing? What are the potential scenarios? You probably can, right? And can we then do 25 minutes in the next meeting to look at, okay, what happens if that happens? You probably can, right? So carving out those little chunks of time and dedicating time to it over time is going to make it a lot less daunting and also assure that if you put the focus on it, it's going to assure that it gets done. And you don't just kind of like, sometimes when we just try to go all in and just focus on that, we lose our momentum and our ability to stomach it. And this work can be really hard. I just want to say that too. It can be really challenging. And so giving yourself some breaks and some time in between the thinking, it goes a long way in terms of self-care, in terms of team care, and just giving your brain that time to do the thing it needs to do, which is have like time where you're not looking directly at the problem, right? I don't know about you all. Like, I have the best ideas when I'm brushing my teeth. When I'm not actually like trying to problem solve, I figure out the problem while I'm brushing my teeth. A lot of folks' brains work that way. So giving yourself some time will go a long way.
I'd add that, this is kind of day-to-day business, like in the corporate world, right? There's always scenario planning. You're always looking at
Yeah.
profits versus losses. You're constantly shifting. And for organizations that care about people, and we are very invested in our colleagues and our peers, these are much harder conversations to have, and we acknowledge that. This is not easy when you're talking about, people and services and community, but again, necessary in order to keep high quality services going in
Yeah.
these challenging times.
Yes, 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 absolutely. So I want to show you all an example scenario, also just to kind of like lower anyone's blood pressure who's feeling like, this has to be really complicated. Friends, it doesn't. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. Here's an example scenario. They identified that they wanted to plan for this scenario, this agency that had if we had a 3 month reimbursement delay. So they looked at if we had a 3 month reimbursement delay, what impacts would that have on our financial, programmatic operations, and community and customer lenses, right? So obviously they found that if we have a 3 month delay, we have some inability to pay our contractors on time, or we may not be able to, we may overdraw our accounts. We're worried about some of the project timelines. We're worried about the loss of momentum on production. And we might not be able to hit our production targets, especially if it happens during kind of our key season to get the work done. Um, in the operations space, we might lose contractors. We might need to increase our admin time. And then obviously that customer piece, that customers are going to wait longer for services, that could reduce trust and confidence in our agency. And also just coming back to, if we can't weatherize homes in the critical time, that equates to missed opportunity for energy savings, right, over time. So that's like a brief scenario, the top 3 or 4 points that would really impact the program. Okay, that's their summary. And then on the next slide and here's their response strategy. So they looked at that and they said, okay, what can we do if we know we're going to have a 3 month delay? Well, we're going to prioritize our low cost, high impact measures. We're going to start doing bi-weekly budget tracking. And we're going to meet with our finance staff to figure out if there's other capital that we can tap into. We're going to maintain our crew. We're going to reduce overtime. We're going to have to pause the non-essential travel and training. Nobody likes it. However, I think it's more important to us that we have jobs, right? And have the capacity than it is that we get to travel and have training. We might also have to freeze that uncommitted hiring. There's some program adjustments you might make, those communication adjustments that they have in there. We need to make sure that we've got that communication to our state office, that communication to our contractors about the payment lag, and creating some templates for how the team who has to answer the phone and say, yeah, we're not taking new jobs, how they're going to respond, right? And then one thing I loved in this scenario was the idea of then also planning for recovery, that once we're out of this lag, how are we going to ramp back up and ensure that we have the capacity we need to be able to respond when the time comes? So see, not overly complicated. They just looked at they looked at what could happen. Here's our 4 lenses, and then here's the couple of things that we're going to do if and when that situation occurs. So
Mary Beth, I'd like
anyway.
to add here for the group, one thing that I know, that I learned the hard way was, especially in these short-term responses, the strategy is leaving staff out of the conversation, and doing so
Mm.
because there is a fear. of being seen as vulnerable, or, staff will leave,
Mm.
or, staff will kind of respond in a certain way. And what I found in my experience has been, it has been those staff that have helped to elevate and lift up these strategies for us. And so that, because, as leaders, we know a lot, but, staff know more. And so knowing the intricacies of the day to day at the team level, who's doing what, where, like that, you're going to get that from your staff, and they will also feel um, part of that decision. They will
Yeah.
feel part of the conversation, heard, felt and seen. So I just wanted to flag that for folks, is do not underestimate what your staff can bring in terms of solutions and insights.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Mia. And I'll add, um, most folks know that your staff know that there's uncertainty, right? And in some ways, if they're not hearing, we're planning, we have a strategy, we're looking for input, that can be anxiety producing and burn people out in a different kind of way than if we just had a very honest conversation or brought folks into the problem solving together, right? Because it gives folks a way to channel that uncertain energy, to ask their questions, to raise the possible solutions that they see. I don't think you can overemphasize the value of feeling valued and heard and seen in the decisions, right? And I don't know, that feeling of like, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. That is a very real feeling that people have. And
Yeah,
so just
being
including
on the
folks.
menu, feeling like
Yeah,
you're on the menu is really no fun.
it's not. It's never fun for anybody. So I think that leads us nicely into just some of our overall tips. We are already covered a couple of these on the next slide. It's like that make time, doesn't have to be 4 days intensive. Can you take 20 minutes out of your next meeting? Can you commit to an hour in a week? Can you, set a deadline for when you're going to have a robust scenario plan? Don't let yourself get overwhelmed. Break it up into those smaller bits. Make sure that you're planning for those multiple scenarios. Very rarely is it just like, one very clear thing that could happen, but what happens if we have the director who's out for 3 months versus 6 months? Our plans are very different. If our funding is cut by 50% versus 20%, very, very different. So do look at those different scenarios. Also, be clear about when you are going to take action. So if you think back to those very first, which one do you like, A or B? In column B, every one of those scenarios started with if funding is reduced by this percent, if there's a delay of this long, if this happens, then we do these things, right? So that when it's time to break glass in case of emergency and break out that scenario plan, right? For you to actually start and have that agreement as a team about when do we hit play on this plan. We talked about fostering that trusting and supportive environment. This is tough stuff. Take care of yourselves, take care of your teams, create space for the honest conversation, and give yourself time to recover as well, and help each other through it. That over communication piece, can't say it enough. We rarely, rarely, rarely over communicate. Be open, be honest, be proactive, and then just that seeking assistance when needed, right? You probably cannot do all of this work by yourself. You're going to need your fiscal staff, you're going to need your HR staff, you're going to need your leadership staff. You've got to have that buy-in. So do work collaboratively across your organization. So those are some quick tips, friends. These are at the end of the scenario planning toolkit, so you can read more about them there as well. So we are like hurtling towards the end of our time together, and we wanted to give you a little bit of time to talk with one another and to stop listening to me, frankly, and for you all to be able to listen to each other. So we're going to go into breakout rooms. Um, and we want to give you some time to talk about what kinds of disruptions or what ifs are you most concerned about right now? How are you thinking about or planning for those possibilities? What are some of the strategies that you're using in your organizations? And then what would help you to feel more prepared to plan for these kinds of disruptions? So those are going to be your three kind of key questions. Um, and we're going to open up a Menti that we're going to hold open for you to put in any reflections or thoughts on these points as you're talking. And before you wrap up, make sure you put a couple of thoughts in there. And when we come back, we'll look at those all together. So looking at time, Mia, do you think we're good for 10 minutes or you think we should do 8 minutes?
I think 10 is cool.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to take 10 minutes. We're going to go into our breakout rooms. The elves are working behind the scenes to make the breakout rooms happen. I'm looking for a signal from the elves that we're ready. Okay, the elves say we're ready. And so you might be prompted to join your breakout room now. Go ahead and go there. And if you have any trouble, give us a shout. Okay. And friends, if you are still in this room and can hear our voices, let us know if you need help getting to your breakout room.
Maribeth, I don't appear to be assigned to a breakout room. This is Amy.
Yes, you're not assigned yet because you and me and Mia were going to figure out which rooms we would go to. I
Okay.
can't see. Oh, it looks like Mia's in room 2. So, Amy, do you want to go to room 1 or room 3? Doesn't matter to me.
I will go to, well, Keisha's in room 1, so I should go to room 3. Or I could just stay out if you, are you going to go to a room also?
Yep. I would say maybe go.
So room 3 has the fewest number of folks, but I happen to know Linda Timbers and Nicole Popejoy really well already.
Okay.
Um,
I'll
and
go
so
to
I
room.
don't,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I'll go to room 3. That sounds great. Okay.
Okay. I'll go to room 1.
Wonderful. See you in a little bit. Back. Wonderful. Okay. Um, so one thing I see in the Menti is we've faced uncertainty before and we can tackle this, right? Kind of a spirit of hope uh, um, comment and reflection from folks' conversations. It's better to be prepared beforehand. The communication of NCAP. Okay. Um, does anyone, oh, yeah, Mia?
Yeah, that may have originated from some of the folks in the group that I was in, and wanting and having a desire to have more communication from NCAP that acknowledges the times that we're in.
Mm,
It was mentioned that there is things coming out from NCAF, and David is providing those insights and kind of holds people together. At the same time, there was just some discussion like during COVID, it felt very different than, you know, that emergency of the moment versus today. And they really, folks relied on that source of strength, source of truth, um, to kind of live, and they could bring that back and live into. So, they said, it's just kind of like you're not alone is the feeling that people are really yearning for right now.
that's good feedback. Good to know. Gosh, I remember those calls where we would all come together have that moment just to kind of touch base, hear what was happening, and think strategically together. So appreciate that. And that's something Mia and I can take back to leadership here. Plug on and rely on the resources and people available to help your agency succeed. Yeah, we are not alone. There are a lot of resources out there. I heard a state association talking, you have, it's not even just like your national associations, your state associations have great resources. You have partners, you have lots of folks in your corner to kind of help you navigate the space. There are other agencies and organizations that depend on your success. Leverage that to help find solutions to challenges or assistance in your strategies. That's right. There are a lot of organizations that we work with and rely on us too, right? We are a part of the local ecosystem, and um, those partners can be really helpful in these moments. So thank you. Thank you for those reflections. Mia, we are just a few minutes from the end of our time together. So I think I'm going to pass back to you to take us through our closing and reflections and some of the other resources we want to leave folks with.
Sure. Thank you, Mary Beth. I think we're going to kind of show you a couple slides because as we kind of noted in um, the breakout that I was in, it's like, you kind of go, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And, while there is uncertainty and, budget and, those are all real struggles. Um, at the same time, there's nothing like being together, as we noted, um, to lean on each other, to share some, you know, um, from the year before, check in with the folks that kind of do the same things and learn from one another. And so we're just kind of flagging the conference that's happening here in Detroit, in my hometown. I get to show it off. Yay. Um, there's going to be over 70 workshops. There's some pre-conference sessions. For the first time ever, the one that I want to flag is the Energy Summit. And it's on Tuesday, the 26th. And what we're doing is we've made room for about 100 um, executive directors, finance, and weatherization directors. If all three can come, that's great. If one or two can come, that's good. But really getting these key folks into a room together to really break it down. And what are you experiencing back home? What are some of the things that you guys need to, that folks need to put their heads together on? Um, and bring these, key leaders to supporting the success. And in some cases, rewriting the ship. In some cases, taking a look at new opportunities. But it isn't often that leaders get to step away from the day to day and sit up on the summit and work together to put some of these strategies together. So that's the conference. Um, Next. So yeah, if you'd like to check it out, you can register. There was the QR code. Mary Beth, do you want to talk about the new Executive Directors Institute real quick?
Sure thing. The new Executive Directors Institute is for those executive directors who have been in their role for 5 years or less. And it's a time to come together and learn the ropes and make peer connections and get the support you need as you get started. So if you have a new executive director in your life, highly recommend this learning opportunity. It will be held as a pre-conference to annual convention. So on Tuesday, and then there will be a follow-up virtual meeting for folks who attend. So it's going to be a great day. I hope folks can join us.
Thanks, Mary Beth. I think the next slide is what we're doing is really thanking you for being here. You can contact us anytime. We have the ability and capacity to do some one-on-one training and technical assistance. If we don't have it here on staff, we can try to kind of reference and pull from some subject matter experts who might be able to help you talk through and think through some things. So please do not hesitate to reach out, email us, and we will respond. Um, we're ready. We're ready to help. I think, and with that, we've got about a minute left. Does anyone want to leave us with a thought or a saying? Helping people, changing lives.
Changing lives, friend.
Thank you all very, very, very much. We bend, we don't break. Yes, Nicole. Yes, Nicole. There you go. Thank you all very much.
Take care.
Take care.